Nick Walker brought the best physique of his career to the recent 2026 Tampa Pro, and I've already compared this version of Nick against Andrew Jacked and Derek Lunsford, where he performed exceptionally well. Today though, he faces what might be his toughest challenge yet, Samson Dauda at his absolute best from his 2024 Mr. Olympia victory. So without further ado, let's get into the comparison. But first, let's get rid of the distracting backgrounds and put both athletes on the same stage for the fairest comparison possible. Front double biceps, and Nick has indeed improved this pose with the tighter midsection he showcased at the 2026 Tampa Pro. Combined with his incredible arms, overall muscularity and level of polish, he's become an absolute powerhouse in this pose. However, it's also true that his physique is still held back by less than ideal proportions, especially against someone like Samson, whose greatest strength is his structure and overall aesthetics. Samson's arms aren't on Nick's level, but they're significantly better than someone like Derek's. On top of that, Samson is also winning the lower body here, giving him plenty of arguments to take this pose. Samson is often criticized for coming in too soft or lacking conditioning, but at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, I think he found the perfect balance for his physique between fullness and conditioning. It was the ideal look for his genetics, and in my opinion, it surpasses what Nick is bringing here. So thanks to the superior flow, bigger frame, stronger lower body, and the more complete overall look, Samson Dauda wins the front double biceps. Next is the front lat spread, and even more so than in the front double biceps, this is where Nick starts to struggle. You could argue that this is the pose most heavily influenced by overall flow and structure, and that's exactly where Nick is at a disadvantage. His proportions simply aren't ideal. He has shorter limbs, a longer torso, a wider waist, and narrower clavicles, all of which hurt the overall presentation in a pose like this. Samson, on the other hand, looks outstanding. He has the wider frame, the better X frame, and he simply opens up much more impressively. The only real criticisms I have of Samson here are the look of his shoulders. They've never been my favorite in this pose, and the fact that he relaxes his midsection a bit too much. But at this point, we're really just nitpicking. Overall, Samson is clearly winning the front lat spread. His superior structure, width, and overall flow make this a decisive victory. Samson Dauda takes the pose, extending his lead to 2-0. Side chest is next, and even though this is one of Nick Walker's strongest poses, he's up against what is arguably the best side chest in the world today. Samson possesses one of the greatest chest developments we've ever seen, and when you compare it to Nick's relatively flat chest, the difference becomes pretty decisive in this pose. But that's not all. Samson's arms and shoulders are more than impressive enough to hold their own against Nick's, and his lower body also looks surprisingly competitive here. I'll still give the side leg to Nick. His hamstring drop and overall leg thickness remain exceptional, but it's simply not enough to overcome everything Samson is bringing in the upper body. For me, this pose belongs comfortably to Samson. After the first three poses, the 2024 Mr. Olympia has already built a commanding 3-0 lead over this new version of Nick Walker. But now we turn around for the back double biceps, and even though I'm genuinely impressed with Samson's back at this show, there's really not much he can do against Nick in this pose as a whole. I actually believe Nick still has the superior back, but even if you disagree on that, he unquestionably dominates the arms and shoulders, and he absolutely destroys Samson from the waist down with those ridiculous hamstrings and incredibly complete wheels. Samson's level of detail and conditioning was very respectable at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, the best we've ever seen from him, but it's still nowhere near the level of dryness and muscle separation that Nick is displaying here. For what it's worth, I'd also argue that Nick presents the stronger taper in this pose, which only reinforces his advantage. There really aren't many arguments to be made for Samson here. Nick Walker takes the back double biceps convincingly, getting himself on the board and cutting the deficit to 3-1. Back lat spread is next, and this one looks much closer than the back double biceps. This time, I actually believe Samson showcases the better back. I don't know what he did for this show because I've never seen his back look this good. Not before this contest, and not even after. Nick's back is also phenomenal, but I think Samson has the slight edge in symmetry, shape, and that three-dimensional thickness through the upper back. However, the lower body once again becomes a massive argument in Nick's favor. Now I know this isn't the hamstring spread, it's the back lat spread, but the pose is still judged as a complete package, and I think Nick's advantage from the waist down is greater than Samson's advantage in the upper body. In fact, I think the upper bodies are actually very close. The real separation comes from the wheels. Nick's hamstrings and calves are simply on another level, and for me, that's enough to swing the pose in his favor. That said, I could completely understand if you see this one differently. It's one of the closest poses in the comparison. Personally, I have Nick Walker winning both back poses, cutting Samson's lead to 3-2. Side triceps is next, and this looks like the closest pose so far. Samson looks fantastic with this Dorian-esque execution. He appears aesthetic, well-balanced, and exceptionally polished for his standards. His triceps are also thick and impressive, making this one of his stronger poses. On the other side, Nick is hitting a more conventional version of the pose. His triceps are at least just as dominant, if not slightly better, and once again he has the superior side leg. What's even more interesting is that this is probably Nick Walker's most aesthetic pose. Somehow his midsection looks surprisingly tight from the side, his abs are clearly defined, and for once, I actually think he's pushing Samson in the aesthetics department. Overall, this pose could genuinely go either way, but based on the judging criteria we've seen in recent years, I think the judges have made it pretty clear that they preferred the more conventional execution of the side triceps, and considering Nick is absolutely nailing that look while also bringing the better lower body, I'd give him the edge here. That said, I really like Samson in this pose as well. Nick Walker takes the side triceps, completing the comeback and tying the score at 3-3, after overcoming an early 3-point deficit. Abs and thighs is next, and usually this isn't one of Samson's best poses because his abs tend to look a bit washed out. But at the 2024 Mr. Olympia, he absolutely nailed it. He turned what is normally one of his weaker poses into one of his strongest. His superior aesthetics, excellent abdominal presentation, and outstanding quads make his abs and thighs incredibly difficult to beat. Nick has definitely improved his midsection, and his abs are actually more defined than those of probably 90% of the athletes competing today. But once again, his proportions hold him back. He's very upper body dominant, his waist is still relatively wide, and his quad sweep simply can't match Samson's. So while Nick has made tremendous progress in this pose, I still think Samson has the more complete presentation. Samson Dauda wins the abs and thighs, extending his lead to 4-3 heading into the final pose. Most muscular is next, and once again, we've got a very difficult pose to judge. We all know Nick is an absolute powerhouse in the most muscular, but unlike many of his opponents, Samson has the roundness and fullness to go toe-to-toe with him. Nick is still the more polished athlete, especially in terms of conditioning. He's also winning the shoulders, but Samson has noticeably more roundness through the chest and, in my opinion, fuller quads, giving him a very different kind of look. There's also the question of execution. Samson is hitting the crab variation here, which personally isn't my favorite. I actually think his hands clasped most muscular looks much better. Somehow, in this variation, he loses some of that incredible chest pop. Even so, it's still a fantastic presentation. As for Nick, I've always disliked this variation of the pose and wished he'd stop hitting it. But at the 2026 Tampa Pro, he finally nailed the execution. His midsection was tight enough, his abs were defined enough, and for the first time, they actually became a strength rather than a weakness in this pose. Call me crazy, but when I compare these two side by side, I actually prefer Nick's look. Now this is extremely close and I could completely understand if you gave the pose to Samson instead, but for me, Nick Walker takes the most muscular, tying the comparison at 4-4 by the end, and honestly, I think that's the fairest result. I'm sure Nick's haters will be fuming in the comments after this one, but let me make one thing clear. I actually believe Samson would win this comparison under today's judging criteria, which place a much greater emphasis on aesthetics, structure and flow than they did a decade ago. But for me personally, bodybuilding has always been about presenting the most complete physique possible. I value muscle development from head to toe, minimal weak points, and above all conditioning. If two athletes are close, I'll almost always favor the one who's more peeled, more detailed, and more complete rather than simply the one with the prettier structure. That's why personally I would have Nick Walker beating this version of Samson Dauda. Of course, that's just my opinion. Let me know how you scored it down in the comments, because I have a feeling this one is going to divide the bodybuilding community.